had only been working at the convenience store for a couple of weeks when things started getting weird. I was a college student, and the overnight shift was all that fit into my schedule. The store was quiet and remote, situated at the edge of town, bordered by empty fields and a dark stretch of road that seemed to lead nowhere. It was supposed to be an easy gig. I never expected it to turn into the strangest experience of my life. My shift usually started around 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. Most nights were uneventful. I'd stock shelves, clean up, and occasionally help out the few customers who came by. But something changed around the third week. It started with a phone call. It was past midnight when the store phone rang. I picked it up, expecting maybe a call from my boss or some late-night prank. But there was nothing, just silence on the other end. I waited for a moment, saying, "Hello?" and asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. I shrugged it off as a prank and hung up, but the calls kept coming. Every night at precisely 12:15 a.m., the phone would ring. Each time, I'd pick up to silence on the other end. I started letting it ring, but the persistent, shrill sound would cut through the quiet, and eventually, I had to pick up just to make it stop. By the end of the week, the calls were starting to get under my skin, making the long hours feel tense and uncomfortable. Then, one night, the caller actually spoke. It was 12:15 a.m. again, and the phone rang as usual. This time, when I answered, I didn't even bother with a greeting. I was half asleep, leaning over the counter with my chin propped up on my hand. Then I heard it. A faint, whispery voice. "Are you alone?" I jolted awake, the question hanging in the air. I thought maybe it was one of my friends pulling a prank, but I didn't recognize the voice. It was low, almost hoarse, and unmistakably serious. "Who is this?" I asked, forcing a casual tone, though my heart was pounding. Silence. The line went dead. I put the phone back on the receiver, but the question stayed with me for the rest of my shift. I told myself it was just some creep trying to scare me, but the voice felt wrong somehow. It lingered in my head like a bad dream, making me jump at every small noise. The following night, the phone call didn't come. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety, wondering why it had stopped. I tried to focus on my work, convincing myself that it was over, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was a strange sensation, an unexplainable prickling at the back of my neck that made me check the windows every few minutes. Around 1 a.m., I heard a noise, a faint scraping sound, like something brushing against the outside wall. My pulse quickened as I moved toward the window, half expecting to see someone peering in. But the lot was empty, bathed in the dull glow of the parking lot lights. I stood there for a moment, scanning the empty road and the fields beyond, but nothing seemed out of place. I went back to my duties, trying to brush it off as my imagination. But a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, closer. It sounded like someone dragging something across the pavement outside the front entrance. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped out from behind the counter and walked cautiously toward the door, my heart pounding. I flipped the lock and opened it, the cold night air hitting me like a wave. I scanned the lot with my flashlight, but there was nothing. The only sound was the hum of the streetlight above. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed something near the door, a small slip of paper folded up on the ground. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. In shaky handwriting, it read, "Don't ignore the phone." I stared at the note, a chill running down my spine. Who would leave something like this? And why? The feeling of being watched intensified, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few seconds as I worked. I didn't hear any more noises for the rest of the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. The next night, I was dreading 12:15, wondering if the phone would ring again. When the time came, I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the clock. The seconds ticked by, stretching into an unbearable silence. Then, right on cue, the phone rang. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, but the note's warning echoed in my mind. I picked up the receiver, my throat tight. There was a long pause, Then the whispery voice from before spoke, sounding even closer this time. "Why didn't you come outside?" I felt my blood turn to ice. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" There was no answer, just a faint, almost inaudible laugh. Then the line went dead. By this point, I was seriously freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I was the only one on shift, and calling the police felt extreme, especially since I didn't have much to tell them. Instead, I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound, my mind racing with questions. I was exhausted by the time my shift ended, barely able to make it through my classes the next day. That night, I considered calling in sick, but I knew I couldn't afford to lose the hours. When I arrived, everything seemed normal, and for a while, I let myself believe that maybe it was over. But at 12:15, the phone rang again. I stared at it, my heart hammering, and reluctantly picked it up. This time there was no voice, just heavy breathing, slow and deliberate, like whoever was on the other end wanted me to know they were there. I stayed silent, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. Finally, the call ended, leaving me in tense silence. At 2 a.m., I went to take out the trash, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. As I stepped outside, I saw something strange. A figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. They were too far away for me to make out any details, but I could see enough to know they were watching me. My heart raced as I stared at them, waiting for them to move, to say something. But they just stood there, silent and still. I threw the trash bags into the dumpster and hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night glancing out the window, but the figure didn't come any closer. They just stood there, like a shadow in the distance, watching. The next few nights were a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. I barely slept, constantly on edge, waiting for the next call, the next sighting. I tried to tell my manager about it, but he just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a prank. "People get bored out here," he said with a dismissive wave. "They're just messing with you." But I knew it was more than that. The calls, the figure, the note. It felt like someone was trying to scare me, to send me a message. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was out there wanted something from me. Something I couldn't understand. One night, as I was closing up, the power suddenly went out, plunging the store into darkness. I stood frozen behind the counter, my only light coming from the flashlight on my phone. I tried to call my manager, but my phone had no signal. I was completely alone. Then I heard a sound, a soft, shuffling noise coming from the back of the store. My heart pounded as I crept toward the sound, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I rounded the corner and froze. There, in the middle of the aisle, was another note. I bent down, my hands trembling as I picked it up. "Last chance," it read in the same shaky handwriting. "Come outside." I dropped the note and backed away, feeling a surge of panic. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to lock myself in the office and wait until morning. But something compelled me to follow the note's instructions, to face whatever was out there. With my flashlight held high, I stepped outside, scanning the lot for any sign of movement. The air was cold and silent, the darkness pressing in around me. I took a few cautious steps forward, my heart racing. Then I saw it. A car parked at the far end of the lot, its headlights off. The figure was standing beside it, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their gaze, like a weight pressing down on me. I took a step back, but the figure moved forward, slowly closing the distance between us. I turned and bolted back into the store, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. The figure didn't try to follow. They just stood there, watching me through the glass, their face hidden in shadow. I backed away, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. When I looked up, they were gone. I never found out who they were or what they wanted. The calls stopped after that night, and I didn't see the figure again. But I'll never forget the feeling of their eyes on me, the sense of dread that still lingers whenever I'm alone at night. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting for the next chance to reach out.